I guess I'm supposed to introduce myself and then talk for as long as you can stay awake, to be real honest. I'm Jeanette Cooper. I'm a co-founder of Partners for Ethical Care. We're a nonprofit organization organized in Illinois, but our volunteers are across the world. We have a core group of volunteers of 7 or 8. We just happen to be all mothers. We are all volunteers. We actually don't have any staff, whatever that means. We're all in a professional, personal position that we can dedicate time just to do this. So we're not a well-funded right-wing transphobic hate group of grifters. I'm the treasurer, so I can guarantee that we're not well-funded. I don't know about the rest of all of that stuff. So I want to talk about a few things. Normally I have prepared speeches. If you wanted to Google Jeanette Cooper, you can see a bunch of the garbage that has spewed out of my face in other locations, on other, generally on this topic. I've spoken in Madison in the spring. I'm a radical feminist, and my colleagues in a parent group run a prayer group that I'm not allowed in because I'm not a believer. But I do have a lot of compassion for every human being, and they said I'm one of the best Christians they've ever met, even though I don't believe in Christ. So I feel very good about that. So I wanted to go over kind of 3 things, and the 3 things that I really think are important are, I want you to understand why parents affirm their children. I think that we have to have compassion for parents who are doing this and try to understand what brings a parent to the point that they're sterilizing their own child. There's reasons for this, and it's important to meet people kind of where they are and have compassion for every single human being. So I did want to talk about that, and then my own personal story. You can actually watch an 8-minute documentary about the horror of my life by Independent Women's Forum if you Google Jeanette Cooper, and I'll just say one thing about that. And then I wanted to talk about what you can actually do to help children, obviously, and what you can do to help parents, which is what I generally spend most of my time doing, is helping parents to understand how they can help their children. So why would parents do this? Why would parents actually positively reinforce what is an incorrect, what is called a cognitive error? Nobody is born in the wrong body. That's not real. That's an emotional kind of response. So that's emotional reasoning. That's not real. So why would a parent kind of say that it's possible that there's something wrong with you? They're seeing a child in distress. And when you see a child in distress, let's say when they're 1 year old, if any of you are parents, you've watched your child try to learn how to walk, and they pull up and they cry and they fall and all this stuff. And you have a choice in those moments. You can actually just pick your child up and you can carry them around. And then when they're 16, they're going to be in a wheelchair, because you didn't let them grow through the distress of learning how to walk. And those challenges get a little bit harder as children get older, obviously, and it's the reason why we don't start with teenagers out of our vaginas. So it's better if you start with small distresses, and you can kind of learn a little bit and grow your own patience. But the things that you all know that we all have as parents is a bunch of stressors just in society in general, but also in our lives with our work schedules and the pull of a bunch of different things. It makes our capacity for withstanding distress a little bit complicated. So when a child gets to the point of teenage years and they are in kind of in a greater sense of distress, and the whole society has anxiety over everything, basically, it becomes harder to withstand that, and you want to be able to actually intercede, do something that you think would be helpful. Now, people are doing what they think might be helpful because they're told that their child will kill themselves, possibly. And that's a parent, if any of you are parents, that is likely your greatest fear, that your child will die before you. That happened to my grandmother. One of her sons died before her. It was the worst thing in her life. And of course, that is the worst thing that I think anyone can imagine as a parent. I can't imagine anything worse. So it makes sense for a parent to say, I don't want that to happen. That's what we call the suicide myth. That's a myth. In order to get a completed suicide, You need actually 4 complete things, and suicidologists can tell you what those things are. You actually need 4 components to suicide. It's not one thing. That's not how suicide works. So what happens is parents go to professionals, and then those professionals lie to them. They tell them, if you don't do this, your child is more likely to kill themselves. And then the parents are in such distress, they want an answer, and they go to professionals, and professionals lead them down a pretty awful path. And that's unethical. I don't know what else to say. I would like to believe that those professionals are just inept and that they're not malicious. I don't want to think that people are malicious. It's better if I think that maybe they just don't know what to do because this is very complicated and they can't solve everybody's problems. And what we know actually is that you can actually help children through something that we've known for quite a bit, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. That's actually the way that you really do help children with distress. My phone keeps shutting off. It doesn't want me to talk, and maybe you don't either. So the third thing that I think we all see in society is that we want to be seen as good people. I think everybody, if I asked if you want to be seen as a good person, I think everybody would raise their hand in this room. And our idea of what a good parent is and what a good person is a person right now who affirms or positively reinforces this idea of the concept of a gender identity, which is a completely false idea. There is no such animal. That doesn't exist. It's a unicorn. There's no unicorn farm. Nobody has a gender identity. That's not a thing. But in society, we are somehow bad parents if we don't affirm this idea. So parents don't want to be seen as bad. They want to be seen as good. And so they cannot withstand the social pressure. They don't have enough people around them. And so they cave. Of course they do. Of course they do. It makes sense that somebody would say, I don't want all my friends to desert me. I don't want to be left alone here. All the people around me are telling me I'm a bad parent if I don't do this. And so guess what? You do it. Of course you do. It makes sense to go ahead and use, a kid's pronouns and name and whatever and start them on puberty block. You do it. Of course you do. It makes sense if I give you that scenario. So, and I'll tell you how it's possible to not do that. The ways that I teach parents that you don't actually have to do that. They need certain things in their lives to not fall down that path. Now me, somehow I didn't do that. My child, like I said, I spent many, summers in Michigan at the Radical Feminist Music Festival, so I know what a woman is. I think everybody in this room knows what a woman is. So I saw the variety of women that can exist. And women can have beards from PCOS, and women can be more like masculine presenting, I suppose how I am. And women can be all kinds of things, but they are female, and that is just what it is. So I had some foundation, and I had what I describe and what Jennifer and Partners for Ethical Care describes as not perfect parents, but good enough parents. Most parents are good enough. And no shame, mom, dad, you're good parents. But most parents are good enough. Abuse and neglect is a real thing, that there are real criteria to report abuse and neglect to Child Protective Services. Not using somebody's pronouns is not abusive. That's not true. I asked myself, as my child said, I'm trans, and I feel unsafe with mom because she doesn't believe that I'm something other than female. Then my child said she's unsafe, and I said, please report me to Child Protective Services. And my attorney said, we have no grounds for that. And I said, I know. So what is happening right now? I don't understand what's going on. So my daughter managed to figure out how you can get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. You can look it up on the internet. You all can get one. I'll give you a week on the internet, and you can all get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. Just keep shopping around for a therapist. You'll get one. I always say my cat can get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So instead of just going along, my child went to her dad's house, and I said, I don't think, I have some questions. And questions are not allowed. I think you all know that in society, questions are not allowed anymore. Questions are banned, no curiosity. And I was just wondering some things, but I wasn't allowed to do that. So I completely lost custody of my daughter, July 2019. I have no custody of her. I haven't seen her. It's 3.5 years. I have no legal ability to even go anywhere near where she is. I have no medical decision-making, no educational decision-making. I thought I would die, and I think most people in this room would say if I got my child taken away in that way or had to agree, was coerced to agree to that, I think I would die. And I'm going to tell you, you don't actually die. You can have the worst pain of your life and it actually doesn't kill you. Pain doesn't kill you. You find some things in your life that can help you through that. Like I found some people around me who could help me. So I have postal mail. I can send my daughter letters. She's not required to respond. She does not respond. So she's 16 now, and in order to get her diagnosis, she basically dressed up like me, which is kind of funny. I'm a general contractor, so she basically did that outfit minus the steel-toe boots and the safety glasses, and she got her diagnosis. And then she went back to what she normally looks like, which is like painted nails. She does all the things I don't do. She paints her nails, she wears makeup, she wears a bra, she shaves her legs. I don't do any of that stuff. I'm just not into that. Everybody's different, and I'm really different, I guess. So, she went back to that, and now she's a beautiful young woman with, I don't know how she could possibly be diagnosed with gender dysphoria, but because I didn't, I guess I said, sure, I'll call you whatever, I'll use your neo-pronouns. But I don't think that's actually going to help, and I want to get you real help. So I complied with the things that they wanted. It's not that I didn't. I did that. It just wasn't enough because I'm not a believer. I can't fake belief. I just can't fake it. And I don't think anybody who goes to church here would want somebody who doesn't believe to pretend that they do. I think that'd be ridiculous. That's kind of bearing false witness, I think. So I can't do that. And they really didn't like that. So they gave me some criteria in order to have family therapy with her, which I did. I went to Lurie Children's Hospital. I sat in a room full of parents who are transing their children, getting double mastectomies for their daughters, and transing their kids to sterility. And I sat there and I witnessed basically a support group of parents with depression, anxiety, narcissism, trauma, a bunch of things. But I don't believe in the concept of trans kids, so I tried to help them. I participated. I have compassion for those parents. I feel for them. So I had enough social supports to get me through that, and I think most parents we can build that for parents. And I also had confidence in myself. Like, I was raised in such a way that somehow I missed the part, being raised as a girl, that I was supposed to not have self-confidence and not think that I was capable, and to doubt my own beauty and intelligence. I missed that. Whatever you all got in girlhood, like, I didn't get that part. So somehow I ended up a woman who actually has a strong sense of self-confidence, and a strong, sense of my own self, and an ability to see, like, the possibilities of what, a female can be. So. And I have this kind of internal locus of control. So my sense of self is based on something that is internal. You can insult me in many ways, and I have been told many things, that I've abused my child. She will never talk to me again. If she kills herself, it's my fault. I deserve to have my child taken away. I'm a transphobic bigot. I have nothing. I have no response to that. Maybe it's just exposure therapy that I've done to myself. I'm not sure. But I don't really have any response to any of that, because it's kind of meaningless. You could say lots of things to me, but it doesn't actually change my feelings, most of which I don't know you, so I don't really care what you think. But even people who know me well, I kind of hear what they're saying, and I think that it's more about them than it's about me. So that's kind of a nice thing to have. I want to grow that in kind of all children, so they kind of have that for themselves. So if I did that, and then we have these parents who are actually transing their children, and there's an entire industry that we call the gender industry who is promoting this idea that there is such a thing as a transgender person that is somehow some unicorn, then how do we actually push back against that? Like, what do we have to do? And normally, if you see some of my other speeches online or something, I don't normally talk like in this tone. It's generally very forceful, because I'm trying to convey some sort of message. But to be honest, in my heart, I feel quite compassionate about people who have been harmed. It's quite awful the way that people are being let down by this industry and by professionals. That's terrible. And I think, like I said, it's mostly ineptness. I would say that when we change the concept of what it means to be good, that can be a little dangerous, and so we need to kind of shift that back. What does it mean to be good? What is good behavior, and how can we positively reinforce good behavior? It's not that we want to negatively reinforce bad behavior, because we know that that doesn't actually function the way that we would think it does. It's kind of like, this is terrible, please cut this out of the recording. If your cat pees on the floor and then later you say, don't do that, Fluffy has no idea. Like, Fluffy cannot put that together. So the negative reinforcement of smacking Fluffy on the head is not doing anything for Fluffy. Fluffy doesn't understand. So the positive reinforcement of good job, Fluffy, you get a treat every time you use the box is awesome. And it actually works for human beings too, because we're like all creatures. It doesn't work for plants, I don't think. I don't know though. So I think being able to say this is good and I want to positively reinforce it is one thing. And that gives courage to other people. That's what's kind of nice is when you say, thank you for saying that, thank you for speaking up. Partners for Ethical Care, actually, our philosophy in terms of encouraging legislation and litigation is that we actually send thank you notes. That's all we have. We only have thank you notes. We don't have other types of kind of stationery that we send. We only send messages to legislators and people to say thank you. We actually have a single volunteer, Rachel, not her real name, who sends thank you notes to all kinds of people when you see a news story and you say, oh my gosh, this teacher did something. Let's find out where they live, which doesn't take that long, I'm sorry to say, and then let's send them a thank you note, and that's all she does. We're just giving courage to people to do the right thing. But the other thing is, most of kind of what happens in therapy in general is for people to say, I don't know, actually. I'm not sure what's going to happen. So when a kid says, I'm scared that nobody's going to like me, I'm scared I'm going to grow up and be ugly like Jeanette, I'm scared that, this terrible thing is going to happen to me, we don't know, actually. I'm scared I'm going to lose custody of my child and never see her again, and she's never going to talk to me. Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea whether my daughter's going to talk to me again. I don't know. It's possible. I mean, anything's possible, right? I could get, killed in a car accident on the way home too, or I could win the lottery, but I'd have to play to win, which is Ohio's motto for the lottery. You have to play to win, which I don't play, so I'm not going to win. That's for sure. I'm not going to win. But you really don't know what's going to happen, and sitting with that kind of discomfort and not knowing is okay. It's okay to sit with that distress and say, I'm not sure, and to tell a kid, I don't know what's going to happen. But whatever happens, you're going to get through it. You're going to get through it. I'm not going to say you're going to be fine, but you're going to get through it, and I'm going to sit here with you until we all get through it. My friend Donna is in a grief share group, and the rule is that if we're all sitting around and sharing, and there's a tissue box here, I'm not allowed to pick up a tissue and give it to Chloe if Chloe's crying. Because what I'm saying is, your crying bothers me. I can't take it. You need to stop. Chloe's the only one that gets to decide that she needs a tissue and she wants to stop crying now, or she wants to blow her nose. I don't get to stop her in her distress because it bothers me. I have to just deal with it. And you can deal with any psychological distress. I am here to tell you, you can. I really thought when I was heaving, crying, and couldn't breathe, and I had lost my only child, I used to sit on the school board. I'm a trained teacher, and somehow I'm abusive. And all of my friends think that there's some skeleton in my closet, that I used to be this liberal, progressive woman who, used to think all of these things, and now I'm a right-wing transphobic bigot. Really? You really think that? And that's why you don't talk to me anymore? Okay, I guess that's fine. But when you actually cry alone in a room for months and months, you get a little hungry, number one. But number two, nobody comes to save you. Like, you have to get up. And you do. You realize, like, nobody's listening to you. Nobody actually cares. And so you got to get up and go to the store and cry, and just mostly the cashiers don't care. Somebody might say, it's going to be all right, sweetie, or whatever, but most people don't even pay attention if you're just bawling through life the whole time. I will highly suggest getting into construction if you have great trauma. It worked well for me. The house that I'd been working on the entire time, I left, I put on pause my PhD at DePaul University, and I became a general contractor, and I finished my first house. It just sold in a week, so it's pretty great. And I took wood shop in high school. So you can really learn anything, and working with your hands, I now know, is really good to, when you have an awful trauma in your life. But it's beautiful. I've reclaimed all the wood, and it's quite lovely. But you can't buy it because it's already sold. So that lesson is the final kind of lesson that I want to say, is that no matter what happens to you, and teaching that to children, that no matter what happens to them, you're going to make it through. It's not going to kill you. Actually, for you to die, you likely have to do an active thing. You likely have to kill yourself, and that takes some activity on your part, or just a freak accident. But it's, very unlikely that that's going to happen. Most likely, you're just going to sit there and feel like crap for a really long time. But it would be kind of nice if you had a person there, sitting beside you. I want to read some short comment, and this is the last thing. So we have this conversation in a Facebook group called, that I admin with some other people, called Concerned Parents of Transgender, Non-Binary Kids, Teens, and Young Adults. And we just kind of grow parents. So we teach parents all kinds of ways that they can change the environment around their child. You can't change a child. Nobody should be changing other people or wish to do it. You can't do that. But you can change their environment. And there's always this conversation that comes up in the group about people want to believe some people are trans, not my kid. So we've considered why they might want to believe that. And I'll tell you that kind of at the end. But I said, I'm not willing as a parent to positively reinforce behaviors that I see as harmful to self and others. I think that trans is a choice, even if it's not a conscious choice. Erin Brewer, if you've ever seen her testify, is great. She describes this in detail in her story. She unconsciously chose to say, I'm a boy, and do stereotypical boy things as a way to cope with her experiences in her environment. If that's what's considered true trans, it's still kind of like a choice or a decision, whether it's conscious or not. It's a way of coping with what's happening around and within a person. Even if I'm born with something, even if we can agree that this feeling is congenital, then the suggestion that there is only one way to live one's life, presenting as the opposite sex, assumes that we actually don't have choices at all. If a person who was, let's say, born with this feeling only has one choice, that's a very conservative idea. And I certainly am not conservative. It's certainly not a liberatory one. Liberation would mean many options and ideas for how to respond to this feeling of being born in the wrong body, or that there's something wrong with you. Suggesting that somebody who has always felt this way, or felt this way from a young age, only has one choice, to take cross-sex hormones and remove healthy body parts, negates the idea of free will completely. People who have all kinds of thoughts and feelings also have choices about how to respond behaviorally to those thoughts and feelings. That's what makes us human and not animals. We are capable of rational choices. When a person is distressed, the chemicals produced in the brain make it less likely that they can produce rational thoughts and take rational actions. That's how anxiety works, literally in your brain. So biologically speaking, if a person is under such distress because they feel they were born in the wrong body, they are psychologically incapable of making a rational decision, and I do not know anyone who would say that it's rational to have a desire to remove your genitals. That's not rational. And no one should be allowing anyone to remove healthy body parts. No one. If somebody has molested children and they are a pedophile, I would never say their genitals should be removed. Ever. Never. No one. I can't get my left arm removed. I can't get any body part removed. Nobody should be doing this to any human being. It's not ethical. The reason that parents have this idea that there is such a thing as a true transgender person is because they want to believe there is some sort of gatekeeping, that there is some sort of test that you have to pass to get this. And once they realize there is no test, there's no gatekeeping, that anyone can go in and they can claim anything they want and have their healthy body parts removed, it is too much for them to bear. So when you hear this idea that there is such a thing as a true transgender person, remember why people keep that idea, because they do not want to believe that it's a free-for-all. And I'm telling you, it is a free-for-all. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm Dr. Sheila Fury. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I grew up in Iowa, so not very far from you. I attended medical school at Creighton University, and then I went to Boston at Boston University Hospitals and did my psychiatry and a fellowship in child psychiatry. And I've been in practice for over 25 years. Part of my practice was working with children in residential and in other settings who were the victims of abuse or neglect. I was an expert witness in the evaluation of children who had been sexually traumatized and had testified in court on a number of those cases. That was part of my practice and for a significant period of time. Currently, I continue to see children and adults in therapy and have worked with children who have significant dysphoric experiences, and some of them related to gender and some of them not related to gender. And so I spend, in my practice is not necessarily medication-based because I do a significant amount of therapy. Further, I work with neuroplasticity. So a large part of my practice is working with children who have learning disabilities. And so I teach neuroplasticity exercises, which is the brain's ability to change and grow. And this, throughout my psychiatric practice, I have been significantly discouraged by others in my field who have drank the Kool-Aid of transgenderism, gender dysphoria, the various nuances that they have. I have seen this driven by the money, and I always go back to follow the money, and the pharmaceutical industry and the amount of money that the pharmaceutical industry is making off this movement to transition children and end normal development. Never in the field of medicine have we chosen to end or stop normal development, and that is a crime. And I understand the pain of families and where they're coming from and what they are sold, not by many of the therapists who are pushing this. But if a child comes into me and wants to self-harm, I do not encourage that. If a child has thoughts of self-harm, I try to understand those and develop plans in which to limit that self-harm. If a child comes in and says that they are addicted to a substance because they like the way it makes them feel, I let them understand that that is simply a feeling, but there are consequences to the feelings and the choices that you make. And that road can lead down to something that you do not want, all right? So every choice has consequences, and some of those consequences are unintended by the person who makes those choices. But we have to be aware. We also have to understand that children are growing and that their minds change and are developing. And as adults, as parents, as physicians, as healthcare providers, if we simply endorse a given moment in time as the entire factual totality of a child, we are doing grave harm. And so I come to answer questions and to be of service to you.
I guess I'm next, right? All right, so my name is Sarah Higdon. I am a 35-year-old trans woman who transitioned back in 2019. Prior to that, I served 7.5 years in the Army as a logistics officer. After I got out, I decided to kind of explore this feeling of uncomfortability and attraction to being the opposite sex that I've had since I was about 4 years old. And I didn't know where it would lead, but it took me about 5 years to determine that the best way for me to live the most comfortable life for myself was to transition. And to me, so far, it's been the right step. But back in 2018, I started seeing a movement that I was concerned about. And I was banned from 2 trans Reddit groups for simply stating, and as we called them at the time, that transgenders exist, and when the detransition rate skyrockets, it's going to harm actual trans people. I was banned for even admitting that this could be a trend that was coming. And so at that point, I knew that I had to start speaking out. This was, again, even before I even made the decision to start transitioning. And so in about 1.5 years onto hormones, I started a YouTube channel. I had made some friends with some people in the space that were talking about these topics because it was coming faster than I even expected. And now I speak out because I see what's happening and what's being pushed onto children. Again, back in 2018, 2019, there was a study, also in 2018, Lisa Lippman did a study that basically said any child that's gender nonconforming, 80% of those children will desist by the age of 16. And that study used to be, I used to write that study off because it was just any gender nonconforming child. It didn't actually dive deep into if you were to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria and like a full psychological evaluation. And what we started to see is now we're seeing these adults telling children that even if you're gender nonconforming, it's probably because you're trans. So we're seeing that 80% number is completely relevant to what we're, everything. Because now when you put a child onto puberty blockers, that child starts what I call the start to the sunk cost fallacy. The moment they make that initial investment into changing their names and pronouns and then starting puberty blockers, they've already made an initial investment. And so for them to now turn around and say that they made a mistake, It's very difficult for somebody to do that. They will continue into this investment even though they know that it might not be right for them. As well, they're getting social pressure. They're getting social pressure from their peers and everything like that, and they're getting all these good, positive feelings. A lot of the children that are transitioning are mostly outcast, and we're probably picked on and all this stuff. And so you have teachers who are nurturing that, and so then they give them positive reinforcements for, identifying as, gender nonconform, or identifying as non-binary or transgender. And so the child then goes and continues to push even further and say, this is probably who I am. And then they start getting into activism and start pushing everything like that. Whereas I look at a lot of the non-binary and stuff like that right now, is it reminds me so much of like the goth kids when I was in school, to where it's kind of the people that are, trying to be counterculture, but then they conform completely to their friend groups. But the only difference is that they're medicalizing. They're medicalizing, and they are being promoted. They're being celebrated by faculty and parents and everything else. And they're also being sold lies. They're being sold that this is some magic cure. And I'm here to tell you, gender dysphoria is not curable. You deal with it every day of your life, and you just try to, get through it. So I don't know why anybody would want to celebrate this as it's some amazing thing to transition. It's not. It's a hard life, and that's what I try to teach these kids. They're also being told that puberty blockers are completely reversible, so you can just flip the switch and go back into normal puberty. That's not true. You can even go look at the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, WPATH's latest guidance. The new guidance states, in one spot, it does say puberty blockers are fully reversible, and if you come off of them, then you can, you'll go into normal puberty and everything like that. But then in other sections it says, but you tells these providers just warn these people, like their patients, that it could cause cognitive impairment, because they've never done studies on what puberty blockers do to a child going through in their key developmental years. The studies are like 60, 70 people. They're not even major studies. And so in one sentence they say, it could do this, but that study that we ran that showed that, it was so small that it's irrelevant. We can't really say this for sure. It could cause bone density issues. We know that if you've gone through some portion of puberty and then you go on puberty blockers, it basically can put you into osteoporosis at the age of 15, 16 years old. But again, those studies are not being done. The only studies that have been done on puberty blockers are done on precocious puberty, which means that like a 6 or 7-year-old starts to go into puberty, so they block it to get them to a normal age to go through puberty. And that's when then they go through a normal puberty as a normal child. But in key developmental years, they don't know what's going on. If there's a reason why they are prescribed off-label, the FDA has not approved them for this procedure, because there's not enough studies on that. And so as you read down the WPATH guidance, you start to realize that, and you say, so your recommendation is to put kids on this and tell people it's 100% safe without actually investing in the full studies to make sure that what you're telling people is not right. And the new president of WPATH, who is Marcy Bowers, she was featured in the Matt Walsh's What is a Woman documentary. She's kind of seems on the fence about a lot of things. She said last year that a male who goes through, is actually put on puberty blockers before they go into puberty and starts to develop, there's 2 issues with that. And that is, one, when she's done surgery on them, they're never able to have an orgasm as an adult, ever, because they've never developed the hormones that develop that. And so you're telling kids that they can consent to something that they've never even experienced and should never experience until adulthood. But you're letting them, determine that that's a risk they're willing to take. And the other issue is that it doesn't create enough penile growth to create the neo-vagina that they create. So they have to graft skin from other areas. And when you start grafting skin from anywhere else on the body, it creates all sorts of other complications, which usually means revisions and other stuff, and which, again, is just more money going into these surgeons' pockets. And so why would you even allow a child to make that decision from a very young age? You can't. We have age of consent laws in the country because children they don't have the cognitive ability to be able to determine like what the second and third order effects of their chosen decisions are. And so that's why we need to start setting laws at 18, because there should be nobody taking any cross-sex hormones until the age of 18. We can get you to 18. It should be therapy. It took me 5 years to figure out that this was what was right for me. And so if you start to go into puberty and you're feeling uncomfortable in your body, the key is not to affirm. We don't affirm. We challenge. We say, why do you feel that way? And I've talked to parents and family members who, a lot of these children are just saying, well, I don't fit in with my friend group. Males saying, I don't fit in with my friend group. I don't like sports. I like Hello Kitty. All this stuff that's just gender non-conforming stuff. And so that's why they are thinking that they may be trans, and that's why they think that they should transition and are being medicalized, because the doctors are even going out there and saying, like Jeanette said, they're telling parents, like, you have to affirm this, or your child's going to commit suicide, which is the worst fear of parents. And so they're manipulating patients, they're manipulating parents. And I do want to just say it's really encouraging to see all of the school board members and all the people that are running for school boards in here tonight, because you guys are where the rubber meets the road. All the parents in here, you guys are what makes the difference. Like, I am one person. I am here to be a resource for you. What I do, I travel around and I do these speaking events. I have a YouTube channel. I do freelance writing, and I've been published in the Post-Millennial and Human Events on these topics. And so I am trying to be a resource for you, because you guys have the numbers. I can help supplement you in what you guys are doing, but it's up to you to be able to make the changes in the school boards, in the state legislatures, to make sure that we can start, putting a gap. And really, I think what Jeanette said was right on. I think a lot of people just don't know. I think there's a lot of ineptness. I think a lot of people don't know. They think they're doing the right thing, and they don't know what's right, and so they think that they're doing the compassionate thing by affirming, but the compassionate thing isn't always the easy thing, and so we have to fight back. It's when we talk about like the books that we're saying that we're banning books in libraries and stuff like that. The moment that you educate somebody and show them what these books are, like you literally show them what's in these books, they don't agree with them. They're disgusted by what they see, but it's been so propagandized to say that these right-wingers, they want to ban these books, and they're just trying to be transphobic or homophobic or whatever phobic, and they're hate groups that are pushing this stuff away, and they just want to silence dissent. And it's almost like they're doing the exact opposite of, like, they're the ones that are trying to silence us. We're here tonight, and I've been called every name in the book. This event was billed as a trans hate event, like with trans hate groups, with, and stuff like that. And I'm like, I'm a contributor to Gays Against Groomers. Like, I am here. I'm like, hello. Like, I'm here. Like, and I think that's another value that I can add to this, because I've done the research, I have the knowledge, and I am here to augment support for every single one of you to say, I think we need more people in the trans community to speak up against what the harm that's being, put on children. Unfortunately, one of the reasons why I don't think that's happening is because of the backlash that we get. to speak out, we get a lot of, hate, and when the left is coming at you, for the majority of trans people who transitioned a long time ago, they're like, I can just live stealth. Nobody knows. I live comfortably in my stealth bubble, and there's no reason for me to step out and endure that hate. And so the few of us that do, we appreciate you guys' support, and I thank you guys for being here as well. So.
I'm Chloe Cole, and I am an 18-year-old detransitioner from California. I actually transitioned as a minor, and I've been speaking out on my experience and against child transition and for improving the affirmative care model since last year. I'm biologically female, but at the age of 12, I started socially transitioning, and after being diagnosed with gender dysphoria at 13, just about 6 months after, I was put on puberty blockers and testosterone. And after my sophomore year, at the age of 15, I went on to get a double-mastectomy. And I eventually detransitioned at the age of 16. Before I transitioned, I was, all things considered, a pretty normal girl. I had my own struggles that really a lot of women in this room probably could relate to. I'm on the spectrum, and I had some social difficulties growing up, especially making friends with and keeping friendships with and relating to other girls my age. And I had body image issues. I started using social media at the age of 12 at the age of 11 when I got my first phone, and growing up, the things that I would hear about growing from a girl into a woman from other girls and women were very negative in nature. Just the way other women and girls would talk about things like female puberty, periods, pregnancy, childbirth, maternity, and aging and menopause made me think that it was all bad and that there wasn't really anything to look forward to in womanhood. And by learning about transitioning, I learned that there was a way out. And really, when you're a girl who doesn't really feel quite like the other girls her age and doesn't really want anything to do with her idea of what a woman is, what wouldn't you do to get out of it? My parents certainly did not push me into this. They were initially cautious and wanted me to refrain from making any permanent medical decisions until I was 18, but they weren't really given a choice. They decided to take me to a doctor, a therapist, to figure out where these feelings are coming from, what it was that made me want to be a boy. And instead, they were given the impression that transition was the only means of treating my distress around my biological sex, and that there's less than a 1% regret rate, and were I not allowed to transition, then I would be at risk of committing suicide. We were told really that I would be happier in doing this and that I would become my true self as a boy and then eventually a man, but that never happened. Obviously, over the course of high school, I started to get worse, but it wasn't until after my surgery that things started coming together and I started to realize what really was going wrong. All it took to get me out of this was a class in psychology. Particularly one chapter that was about childhood development in psychology and parenthood and maternity. Well, firstly, I learned that people my age that the brain doesn't finish developing until about the mid-20s, if not a little bit later. And I was at an age where I was particularly prone to, I still am, to making rash decisions. And it was also really the first time that I had ever really thought about parenting and how that might look for me. I was told during the appointment for hormones that I could potentially lose my ability to naturally have children, and before my surgery I was told, before my mastectomy, I was told that I would not be able to breastfeed whatever children I have in the future. And at first these things didn't mean anything to me because, I mean, I was a kid, and I only had so much, I've only lived so many years in this world, I only had so much experience, and my brain wasn't particularly developed. One of the lessons was about how physical affection and breastfeeding play a role in the bond between a mother and her child, and that bond plays an important role in a child's cognitive and social and emotional development. And had I known any of this before I made any of these decisions, I don't think I would have done it. That was learning about all this, just about being a parent and about family and children and just being an adult, was a key factor in me deciding to do transition. And in doing so, I had a lot of shame in admitting that I was wrong, because I had been in it I'd been on testosterone for about 3 years, and by that point in time, you wouldn't have even guessed that I was a girl. And yet I miss little things like having long hair or wearing makeup and wearing skirts, and I felt like I couldn't do any of that because I no longer looked like a woman. And not only that, but this was a decision that I had been making for quite a while, and everybody around me knew me as their friend, their son, their brother, their nephew, their grandson, Leo. And after 3 years, I had to admit that I was wrong and undo all this progress and pick up all these pieces of my life. I lost a lot of friends during this period. I went cold turkey off of hormones because I didn't really have any guidance from any of my healthcare providers. And during this period of time, I had lost quite a bit of weight. I got very sickly, and it was very difficult to emotionally regulate myself. This affected every single one of my relationships, and I went through senior year without any friends, not only because of this, but because a lot of my friends were either trans or they were trans allies, and I guess the very idea that transition could be wrong for anyone was offensive to them, and they couldn't take it. They certainly didn't like that my opinions around it were changing, and they cut ties with me. But over time, I made new friends outside of school, and I reconnected with my family as well. I also started talking to people who went through the same thing, having transitioned medically and regretting it or being physically harmed by it and going back on their decision. And I realized that despite being told that by other people within the trans community that I was just an outlier that I should have known exactly what I was doing, that I was stupid for doing it, and that I was harming the community just by speaking out about my experiences. I realized that these were all lies, that there are many other men and women and children out there like me, but not all of them make it very far, and not all of them have a voice. And having talked to all these people and just knowing that there's many more out there like me really has compelled me to start speaking out. And in around March or April of last year, I started talking on Twitter about my experience, and my story started getting some traction. I don't remember if it was you or Donna, but
Donna.
Partners for Ethical Care actually reached out to me in late April, early May of last year, and they asked me to come out to Louisiana to speak on some legislature. And I mean, it's not really something that I expected, because just a few months before that, I was just a shut-in in my room all day, just playing video games and doing schoolwork. But it took some convincing. I was 17 at the time, so my parents had to agree to this, and I'm so glad they had, because my story has picked up a lot of traction, and I've been able to reach out to a lot of people and get my story out there and encourage other people to, in my situation, to do the same. And I've recently become a senior fellow at a nonprofit called Do No Harm. There's a lot that I could touch on, but I'm sure that a lot of it will be covered in this panel. So, thank you all for coming.
I'll kick it off because you have some good news that you should share about the Utah legislation.
Oh, yeah.
You kind of touched on that, but I think you should tell everybody what you did yesterday.
So I was just in Utah, and I was testifying on 2 pieces of legislature, actually. The one that I was testifying on a few days ago, unfortunately, did not pass, but the one that I did about a week before did. And it's a moratorium on minors transitioning.
You mentioned, I'm going to start with Chloe, I guess. You mentioned that you're on the spectrum. Do you feel, I know you told me at lunch today that you weren't groomed in school, this happened to you on the internet.
Yeah,
Which parents really need to pay attention to, because we're all focused on schools right now, but it's all over the internet.
Yeah, it was completely over the internet. I mean, I was shocked when I first started hearing about this stuff popping up in schools. I had no idea about it because, I mean, I just graduated last year, and I mean, I was medically transitioning while I was in middle and high school, and yet the subjects of sexuality and gender identity never were brought up in class.
In California.
Yeah, and I live in the middle of California, like in the heart of where all this is all happening.
And yet we have it popping up here and there.
Yeah.
Do you think that you were targeted because you're on the spectrum? Because there has been talk that they do go after autistic children.
I mean, I don't really know. I didn't know that I was autistic until much later in my life.
Okay.
But I noticed that a lot of very vulnerable kids tend to fall into this. Every trans-identified person of either sex that I know of who is my age, they all have some sort of comorbidity, like either depression or like a learning disability. social anxiety, and almost every single one of them either has like some familial trauma, like they've either been abused or neglected, or they went through a divorce, or one of their parents died, or they've been sexually abused or assaulted. Almost every single one of them.
So I've just been handed a bunch of questions that Janelle doesn't want to read. So I will say, I have a question for Sheila. How do we protect our medical institutions and care providers who sow against the gender ideology narrative when countries such as Canada are threatening to revoke medical licenses and new medical students are fully indoctrinated into this?
You speak up, you continue to educate, you protect your family. This is a very critical issue, and doctors are being threatened with loss of license. Doctors are being kicked out of their practices because they're not conforming to the status quo as it is. But the science is real, and you are biologically a male or a female. You are not, it is not your assignment at birth, all right? And so we need to speak against the linguistic nightmare that they have created by speaking the truth. I think in particular, it is helpful to educate about the significant harm from the so-called safe medical transition. It is far from safe. And, we touched on a number of those, but the development of the brain, the development of the brain adrenal hormonal axis is completely disrupted because of hormone blockers. And for many of these children, depending on when they begin those, their bodies and their bones will fuse in a pre-pubertal state. And so this makes them particularly vulnerable to those who could be victims of pedophiles, because pedophiles are attracted to prepubescent children. And when we fuse the long bones of the body in this state, but they chronologically age, and then they become 18, but their bodies are still small, now they are of an age of consent, and yet they are in a body that is not normal, that wouldn't be there in any other circumstances. And this makes them particularly vulnerable. The other issues that we know of medically, as has been mentioned, is that 85 to 87% of children who have these feelings will grow out of them by the age of 20. All right? But if we begin a process of giving them hormones, of having them undergo puberty blockers or transition, estrogen, testosterone, we are causing permanent harm to the body. We are permanently disrupting normal development. And we have to look at the long-term consequences of that. In my experience and in normal experience, if you have a woman who takes hormones because of infertility, she will say to you that psychologically it was one of the most difficult periods of her life. And yet we are giving these same hormones to children. The levels of testosterone that are given to girls are higher than the levels of testosterone measured in polycystic ovarian syndrome. And girls who have, or women who experience polycystic ovarian syndrome, experience significant mood disruption. They have difficulty, hormonally, they have acne, they have hair on their face and other parts of their body. It is very difficult and very painful for these girls. And yet, if we are transitioning them, we give them hormone levels of testosterone that are significantly above those levels. And we're not looking at the long-term implications of that on their uterus, on their breasts, on their ovaries. And many in the medical community simply look at this as, we'll just take them on, we'll remove them, as if just simply removing normal organs solves the problem. It doesn't. And I think that we need to really stand with the facts at hand and stand against the field of psychiatry, the field of psychology, find the doctors who are speaking the truth and support them.
This is kind of a follow-up question on all of that, and Chloe specifically, for you, Corey. In the state of Wisconsin, if we have a child that has gone through what Chloe went through and was given all of the hormones and everything, with or without parental consent before they were 18, does the child have any rights legally to go after the doctors that have done this?
I think that's a really important question. Full disclosure, my area of expertise is K-12 education, so I don't want to speak outside of what I have personal experience with either litigating or researching. I do know, and this doesn't come from Will, but rather what I've heard of personally, that there are countries in Europe where you're seeing informed consent litigation pop up in kind of the medical malpractice context. So I know that it's happening elsewhere. I don't know from personal experience the legal grounds for that. Again, here, in the K-12 arena, I think when we look at these issues in schools, transparency is so important. And we keep hearing from parents, I find out after the fact that my child was learning about this topic that either goes against my belief system or that I simply don't agree with, that isn't medically accurate or age appropriate. What can we do in schools? And curriculum transparency is something that is important, that Will supports, that has been discussed. We supported a bill last year actually on curriculum transparency at the state level. It was passed, but unfortunately vetoed by our governor. So even though we don't have curriculum transparency at the state level, that doesn't mean we can't have it at the local school district level. One of the model school board policies on our website should be in the folder that you all have, Restoring American Education. Kind of helps make it as easy as possible to implement that at the local level. How can you as parents know what's going on in your kids' schools? There is actually a federal law that gives you a right to inspect these materials. It's already in place. Teachers don't necessarily need to provide you copies, but they need to make all instructional materials available for your review as parents or guardians. So I think, in the education area, that's one policy thing that could make a really big difference. Happy to touch upon some of our litigation later. I know that's a really important topic as well, and kind of also touches on that issue of transparency, but I'll let you transition here.
Allie, I can speak to that question.
Please do.
So Partners for Ethical Care runs a project called transitionjustice.org. We match people who have been harmed by the gender industry with attorneys. Now attorneys are contacting us because they want to litigate on this issue. There's not much case law on this yet. And there are various people who have been harmed by gender medicine who are filing lawsuits now. So we don't actually know how that will all pan out. I can say that we do have more attorneys ready to litigate than we have people coming to us right now. We're hoping that the free market actually takes over after we get some lawsuits going, and then people see, the money that they could make off of the people who are doing this harm, hospitals, clinics, doctors, therapists, and then they start to litigate this without us kind of doing a lot of marketing of the concept of transition justice. So it is coming, and we do have attorneys ready to do that, and we are kind of actively looking for people harmed because we know that they're there. And even if somebody feels like they consented to something, I'm going to tell you now, I consented to lose all decision-making for my child and not be able to see her. Would I describe that as coercion? Yeah, I would. Because the alternative was that there are a few things that I was completely coerced into, and I can say that I didn't really have much choice. I actually could have lost more than I've already lost.
Jeanette, how old was your daughter when you lost custody of her?
She left at 12. She was almost 13, so now she's 16 and a half.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I want to say, to touch on the question the doctor was asked, is what do we do when we see somebody doing something wrong, a therapist, a doctor, or something? You report them. They're a licensed professional. File a complaint. The state regulates licensed professionals, including teachers. File a complaint. That's a paper trail we need. You have to say, this person did something wrong. It's actually a very simple form that you can easily Google on your state website to file a complaint. And you should do it. We have to have paper trails that will then help us later through litigation and legislation. We have to do that. And the other thing is what the doctor said, which is, please seek out those people who are doing actual ethical care and spend your money there and give them thanks for what they're doing to help children.
So as a follow-up from Coy, I got another one for you. As a follow-up for the legislation, I'm asked here, what would be the ideal components of a piece of legislation aimed at fighting against this issue?
That's kind of a broad question.
I guess what are your ideal components? Like, how do you want to help these? Because I think everyone on this panel can answer this question.
Well, I think it's just absolutely not for kids. I don't think there should ever be like a total ban for adults, but I do think that there should be an overhaul in the care system for dysphoric patients in general, though, to make it more, because as it is right now, I mean, informed consent just isn't possible. Like, they withhold information from patients, and in the case of minors, their parents and guardians, especially of the medical aspects of transitioning and the side effects that could potentially happen. I mean, they lie to parents about the suicide statistics, and they also don't really look further into the causes behind these people developing gender dysphoria or any comorbid conditions. And those are things that need to be considered.
So you touched on, your age. What do you think is old enough? Some people would say, well, if you're 16 and you drive a car, that's old enough. You're 18, you can vote, that's old enough. But at 18, you can't go to the bar with your dad and have a beer, but you can go overseas and fight for another country. So how do you feel about, this is a huge decision, even at 18.
I think from a legal standpoint, the minimum age should be 18, but like I said, there needs to be a lot more consideration into the possible causes behind a person's gender dysphoria or their stress with their sex. And
I think you ladies probably have
Yeah.
what you'd like to see.
Yeah, I'm
I'm sorry,
Go
I'm
ahead.
trying
No,
to
no,
just
no,
finish
you
up
go.
my
Oh, I'm
thought.
sorry.
No, go.
I'm just trying to think of a way to articulate this.
Okay.
But for making, even if somebody's legally an adult, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're old or mature enough to be able to make such a decision. I mean, especially on the medical aspect of things, it is something that will inevitably affect other areas of your life. It will affect your ability to have children and your ability to breastfeed. And a lot of people don't know that they want to have children until they're well into their 30s, their 40s, sometimes even their 50s. So I really don't think most 18-year-olds would be able to make a decision like this. 18 is still pretty young. I mean, I've been through the ringer, but I've still only been through, I only have so much experience and worldly knowledge.
Thanks. I think the only thing I want to comment on is the statute of limitations. So the statute of limitations on something like medical malpractice and the realization that you have been harmed is frankly way too short. By the time you psychologically realize that you have been harmed, that could come quite a bit later. I mean, we see detransitioners kind of waking up after 5 to 7 years. We need the statute of limitations to be 20 or 30 years out. And that's on medical malpractice. I think there's some hope in terms of child abuse and child sexual abuse in particular, because what we're talking about is the loss of sexual function. I'm a person who, I'm not as concerned as others about fertility as much as I am about a sexual life. I think that orgasm is a human right. I think that you should have that ability and it shouldn't be taken away from you before you're even able to understand it. Certainly. So I'm more concerned about that and quality of living, because you cannot socially interact with people if you don't understand the basics of a sexual feeling. How many jokes can you actually get? It's very complicated. So I think that's a necessity, and I think in terms of litigation, I think there will be more people who will use the expanded, hopefully in many states, expanded statute of limitations for childhood sexual abuse in this arena.
Yeah, I think in terms...
I would concur with that. I think that we do have, so in many states there's no statute of limitations on childhood sexual abuse. I think you're absolutely correct that it will take, for some of these children as they transition into adults, it will take many years for them to realize fully what has happened to them. And only when they're able to come to grips with that will they have, and in a supportive environment, will they have the courage then to go back and file lawsuits. I think that they should absolutely be able to do that. And I want to endorse that if you do see, a teacher or other people promoting this, do not hesitate to file complaints with the Board of Medicine or other boards, including the teachers' boards.
Yeah, I think in terms of legislation, I think a couple of things. In terms of any sex ed program in public schools needs to be an opt-in system. So you need to know exactly what you're going to do. As well as we need to make sure that every state should have on the books that schools have a responsibility to report, whether that's to report your child is socially transitioning, or whether that is to CPS because they think you're a dangerous parent. Now, I'm a libertarian and I absolutely abhor CPS, but there are reasons why they exist. And if a school thinks that a parent is so dangerous that they're going to be dangerous to their child, that's the avenue that they need to go. Otherwise, they're keeping this child in a dangerous situation knowingly. And that's another lawsuit that they could have on their hands as well from that child later on in life. I agree with what Chloe said in terms of like informed consent and for adults. Again, libertarian, I think once you reach adulthood, you can do with your body as you please. You have self-ownership of your body as long as you know, as long as you have the cognitive, as long as you've been deemed to have the cognitive ability to be able to consent. Now, in the current system, we don't have that. We don't have an ability to consent because the doctors out there right now are pushing this. They're not telling it's not even that they're not even telling the whole story, it's they're telling lies. And that is medical malpractice. When doctors tell you lies, again, giving you that this is going to be some fairy tale life and this is the only way to go, and not giving you the other side of the story, that's medical malpractice. And this is why I support all detransitioners, is because their story speaking out is to give that other side of the story that doctors are not giving. Their voices are invaluable because they are telling the harms that are done to them, the manipulation that they felt, even the adult detransitioners, the manipulation that they felt from doctors, and that is medical malpractice. I would rather a doctor say, here's what we know the side effects are, we don't know everything else, and then you sign off on that. But that's not what's happening. They are like actively pushing this because it gets you into the system of, you know, you're going to be on these hormones for the rest of your life. They get you into the system, and it's a big moneymaker for them when they can push this stuff. So that's what I think.
That being when a child is transitioning in school, the school policy prevents teachers and staff from notifying parents that their student is transitioning. These cases are against Madison, Kettle Moraine, and Eau Claire. And at Will, we think they're really, really important because as parents, you have a constitutional right to direct the care and upbringing of your children. And in Madison, the policy is especially egregious because not only are teachers not allowed to tell parents if a child is transitioning, but say your daughter is transitioning to a boy and is using a male name and pronouns in school. They're actually required, if mom or dad shows up that evening for an extracurricular event, to revert back to using the female name and pronouns. So they're actively deceiving parents with that policy. In Kettle Moraine, and our clients, Will's clients, have spoken about this. A middle school age girl decided that she wanted to transition to a boy. And when mom found out about this, she had a conversation with the school and said, well, can we slow down? Please, can we just slow down? I need time. I want to see if there's something going on with my daughter. I don't know a whole lot about this. Can we just wait? And the school said no. We are going to do what your minor child wants, not what you want as a parent. Thankfully, in that case, mom actually ended up taking her daughter to another school, and she didn't have the internet. We talked about the internet too. It's not just schools, it's the internet. She didn't have the internet. She was out of that school, and just in a matter of a few weeks, she said, you know, I am a girl, Mom. Thank you. So that one, we're grateful for her. Just to kind of wrap it up, in Eau Claire, there was a training telling teachers, parents don't have a right to know their child's gender identity. That has to be earned. So these are really pervasive problems going on in our state, and we're hopeful that with our litigation, again, all 3 cases are ongoing, we're hopeful that courts will recognize parents' rights in this regard, and we won't have these policies in our states anymore.
Actually, one more that I also also think what they just did in Utah, what Chloe spoke about, is imperative to on gender transitions for children. In the moratorium, we can go into and say, you know, we need to do the studies. You need to stop blocking the studies, because they're blocking studies because they're afraid of what that will start showing. They're afraid that they will admit that they were wrong. And so some of the legislation that I've seen that's going to be coming up in other states, I can't really talk too much about it, is that they're going to be proposing to get like funding for studies on this type of stuff. And that is the foundation of how you end up starting to fight back even more against this too. And then just one more thing that we did in Georgia, and just to show that this is happening everywhere. I live in Atlanta, so I live in Georgia, a red state with everything's red. They passed last year to add funding to add more clinics in the schools. So our school systems have doctor's offices attached to them now. So kids can go there, and so if the schools are not telling parents what's going on, those kids can go there and get treated at these clinics, at the schools, without parents knowing.
I do want to comment. So I said I'm getting this fancy piece of paper on the wall thing, PhD. So my area of my dissertation is homeschooling and regulation, government regulation. And the way that we won homeschooling, and it took us 25 years, is we just sued schools and they just run out of money. So that's exactly how we're going to win it. That is a predictable outcome. Sue your school. They will run out of money.
The problem with that though, Jeanette, is schools here in Oconomowoc, I mean, they threatened to sue me because I said there's dirty books in the school. And then I had to drag them along to get the books out of school. Corey's my attorney. So if I'm saying too much, she'll stop me. But I mean, I had to drag that school board along that calls themselves a school board of conservatives. They spent taxpayer money threatening to sue me because I didn't think that kids should have books like it's perfectly normal. And there's another one. I don't think I brought it with me. There's a new one. Dan O'Donnell had on his website. Fun Home. Yeah, and I mean, the pictures I showed you today, I was a little uncomfortable showing them to Chloe, but they're gross. So schools just keep taking, here in Wisconsin, just keep taking our money to sue us.
They're going to run out. I'm telling
Well, we're
you.
going to run out first. That's what the fear is.
We're going to win, Corey.
I hope so. Okay, Floyd?
I just had another part to add to the original question of what I'd like to see in legislature. I mean, I used to be a little bit wary of anything that would ban, like completely ban child transitioning, including in kids who already are on that path. I think the best approach to take with that is if a kid has already reached the age of 16 and they've been on these treatments for at least 2 years and they shouldn't be forced to detransition, but if a kid's below that age or if they've been transitioning for less than that period of time, they should be slowly weaned off of it. There have been some pieces of legislature that propose to forcibly detransition pediatric gender patients, transgender patients, which, having been through the process of going off of testosterone cold turkey, it's not healthy. It could potentially be dangerous to their health. So.
Okay, so I have a follow-up on the whole school board DPI. Jill Utterly has recently said that pronouns save lives. She said the DPI had said that pronouns save lives. And I know that she's in an elected position, but what can we do as parents to make that stop? And I know that we put her there. Well, I didn't. Some people put her there. I don't think anybody.
She's appointed by the governor. Be careful.
She's elected. Yeah, she's unfortunately elected.
Poor voting.
Poor voting. I mean, what can we do to regulate that? Because something like that is just
False.
False. Yeah.
It's First Amendment violations.
I think that it's important to know that if you do have the sincerely held belief that sex means male or female, you have a First Amendment right to not use preferred pronouns. Obviously, we seek to be respectful and kind always, but, you know, in schools, students cannot be compelled to use preferred pronouns. They still have First Amendment rights, even in schools. And the same is true to an extent for teachers. You know, teachers are hired, especially in public schools, particularly in public schools, they're hired government employees, so their First Amendment rights are a little bit different when they're instructing in class. That's government speech. Schools can put some restrictions on that. But they cannot be compelled either to use pronouns that go against their beliefs. In Kansas, there was recently a teacher who was suspended for not using preferred pronouns, and she challenged that in litigation and ended up obtaining $95,000 in a settlement. So while it's important to know that we have these First Amendment rights, you know, one of our model policies on our website, since there are a lot of school board members and school board candidates here, is related to pronouns and gender identity, and we've drafted it in a way that just permits teachers to notify parents, because right now a lot of schools aren't allowing teachers to do so. You know, they can be shaped based on your local community. If you want to write that in a way that teachers are required to notify parents if a student is transitioning their gender, that's a possibility as well. I think it's really important to shape these to your local district, your local community. And before I turn it over, I just need to mention that my colleague Luke Berg is here. He's litigating the 3 cases that I had mentioned previously, so feel free to reach out. You can reach out to me as a resource, reach out to Luke. Just had to mention that as well.
I wanted to ask the doctor a question in relationship to pronouns in schools and see, is that, okay. I wanted to ask the doctor a question in relationship to using non-biologically based pronouns and transitioning children in schools. My understanding is that that's a therapeutic treatment that should be administered by a licensed professional, and that they are administering a psychosocial treatment, and that they shouldn't be doing that in schools. That's my understanding. Could you speak to that, doctor?
Yeah, it is a treatment intervention, and teachers in the classroom is not a treatment environment. Okay, there isn't a therapist-patient relationship in the classroom, and yet they're assuming or taking on a therapeutic role that is not there by design or statute, okay? The teacher is not a qualified therapist, all right? The school is not a therapeutic environment in the sense of a medical therapeutic setting, all right? Doesn't mean that we want to do harm to a child in school, but we want to go back to the facts. A girl is a girl, a boy is a boy, all right? And we can discuss in the terms of therapy what it is like and how a child feels about that, being called by their birth name, okay, and not being called, you know, a girl or a boy or he or she. That can be something that can be discussed in therapy, but it does not need, nor should it be, part of the classroom environment. And to force other children, all right, or other students to affirm a belief that is biologically false is to do harm. And you have to understand that that is harmful to the child who's being forced to recognize someone for biologically, or to treat them as something biologically which they are not. And in particular, in the locker rooms, when you have a person who's transitioning in the locker room of the opposite sex, and you're forcing girls or boys to just accept that as the norm, that is psychological harm. It needs to be treated and addressed as harmful to the children in that environment. And I think that's one of the ways that we can get the legal system involved. And I think it's one of the ways that you can advocate for your child who is not transitioning in that is for normal children to say, no, this is not okay, and I'm not going to accept it, and I'm also not going to further say to them or have them acknowledge something which is biologically false.
I could just add to this too. I just want to kind of point out what's going on in the UK right now, because what happens over there generally makes its way over here, and then vice versa. So right now, there was 2 stories that came out last week that showed parents took their kids to a therapist, and the therapist did not go along with the affirmation-only model. Therapist actually told them by no means should they be socially transitioning, because they were on the spectrum, or there's other stuff, that other comorbidities that they probably needed to deal with before they did this. The parent took their kid back to school, and the school said, no, you're wrong, we're going to continue to socially transition your child. Two examples of that, and both those children were medicalized. And the parents were threatened that they would be taken away. And both times the parents were like, multiple times, you can't do this. You can't socially transition my child under therapist orders. One of them actually had their CPS called on them, and it took 2 months for them to drop the case, because they were like, my therapist told me that this is the way that it is. I think that parent actually took the child out of school. But that's what's coming, and that's what we need to be fighting against, and we need to be cognizant of what's going on around in other countries, because they end up making the same ideology makes its way here.
Okay, I know people are getting antsy. I have a couple more questions that I really want to ask. The first one it's for you again, Corey. With the recent news about the rape in the Virginia locker room in school, what rights do parents have to keep boys out of girls' locker rooms, biological boys out of girl locker rooms, and biological girls out of the boys' locker rooms?
That's a great question. Right now in Wisconsin, I don't actually think it's clear. I won't get too into the weeds here, but just to answer the question, there's a case out of the 7th Circuit called Whitaker. Wisconsin is in the 7th Circuit, so it would apply to us. There's some argument about whether it does apply, but it has been treated that way. And essentially, what that case means for Wisconsin is that it would be unlawful for schools to separate bathrooms. It's not about locker rooms specifically, that one's about bathrooms by sex. Not saying that Will agrees with that ruling, but that is what the law currently is in the 7th Circuit. There are other circuits where that's different. I think it will continue to be litigated. Again, it's not clear, but it's been applied in a way that public schools can't separate bathrooms by sex. That could be interpreted to also mean they shouldn't separate locker rooms by sex. It's not entirely clear, but that's kind of our understanding of what the law is in Wisconsin at this time.
Okay, so since you have your mic on, I have a Title IX question for you. the definition of sex means male and female, or does it also include sexual orientation and gender identity?
This is another one that's really important for school board members in particular. You may have heard that the Biden administration is seeking to change Title IX. One of the most significant pieces to the proposed Title IX regulations that came out over the summer would be to change the definition of sex, which means and has historically meant male or female, and to have that include gender identity and sexual orientation. This has been in the news a lot because of women's sports. You know, Title IX is thought to really strengthen women's sports, but if we include gender identity and sexual orientation, gender identity in particular, that would kind of undercut the purpose of it, right? But right now, those regulations are proposed, they're not the law. I have some ideas for why people might be misled to believe it is the law, but it is not. Right now they're just proposed, they're not binding, and it will likely be many months before a final rule is issued, and even when a final rule is issued, it will have an effective date, and even when that happens, we expect litigation on this topic. So right now, Title IX, as it stands in the law, still means male or female. We have another resource on our website if you're a school board member, if maybe you're getting advice that, oh, no, our hands are tied, Title IX, we have to implement it as if it's gender identity and sexual orientation. We have kind of a one-page document just summarizing that these are actually proposed rules, here's the status, and sex in Title IX right now means male or female.
Okay, so I have now if neither of you want to answer this, I understand, but it's for Chloe and Sarah. You both made a really radical, life-altering decision. Before both of you, before your surgeries, before the hormones, were you asked or required by the medical community to take any kind of counseling to explore why you wanted to do this?
So before I got hormones, no. I was able to walk into, I waited 3 months for an appointment, went in, walked out with a prescription. I mean, that's the way I wanted to do it, though, too. Like I said, I know myself. I was 30 years old at the time, so I figured I knew what I was doing. When I had surgery, they required 2 therapist letters, and one of them had to be a PhD. And that's generally what most, depending on what the surgery, that's what most clinics are requiring. And that's according to the WPATH guidance. That I can't recall if they removed that requirement in the latest guidance, but that's at least the version 7 required that for certain surgeries.
They actually went against the standards of care at the time in the way that they treated me. It was really expedited. I think at the time they were supposed to wait about a year before starting any medical intervention just to observe me and just let me be. But it was only, like I said, about 6 months between getting the diagnosis for gender dysphoria and then being put on blockers. And then a month after that, I was given the consent forms and had my first shot of testosterone. The minimum age for blockers, I think, was either 8 or 9 years old, which I was well past that. I was about 3 to 4 years into puberty.
Did you say 8 or 9?
Yeah. And the minimum age for cross-sex hormones, I think, was 15 or 16, and I was 2 to 3 years younger than that. And I wasn't supposed to undergo surgery until I was at least 18, but I was 15.
How did you get that passed then? How were you able to do that?
Well, I don't think, so these were guidelines, but they weren't strict rulings.
Okay. So I have a lot of questions, and I could sit here all night, but I know people are getting antsy and tired. So I have one last question for Jeanette, and then I'd like everybody to give just like a couple last, not 10 or 12 minutes, just, like a couple closing comments. But it's for Jeanette. you are, I mean, you are tomboy. But, you know, the plastic definition of tomboy, you prefer to, like, you know, you reference the way that you dress and...
You haven't seen me go to the symphony. I wear dresses.
Well, sometimes you're dressed a little tomboyish.
It's true.
Do you feel that...
You can change outfits. It doesn't mean you change sex.
Well, do you feel that if you were a child in the school system today, or with the way the medical community is acting today, or with the internet influence, that you would have thought that perhaps you needed to change your gender?
Sure, absolutely. I would have bullied my parents until they did it. I would have been Chloe. I mean, it's absolutely, 100%.
I didn't bully my parents.
No, I'm saying like I would have said like, hey, I need this, I want this, and my parents would have watched my distress, wondered what they could do. I mean, my mom is in the medical profession. I think your mom's in the medical profession. I mean, yeah, my parents probably would have done a very similar thing. Maybe. I don't know. We can't say. But
you know that you probably would have said...
I'm going to guess. I mean, I'm pretty strong-headed. I run a parent group of 3,300 parents, and I'm going to say that it's pretty likely. I mean, a lot of the parents would say the same thing. They would say, I would have been that kid, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. But the crazy thing is I could do it today. Like Sarah said, I can go into Planned Parenthood tomorrow morning. I can get testosterone in 30 minutes. Is that going to make me more likely to transition? Yeah, because it's going to dissociate me from my body.
And don't forget that Planned Parenthood is well funded with our taxpayer money.
Yeah, and I'm not, I mean, I used to donate to Planned Parenthood. They are the largest provider of cross-sex hormones in this country. They are transing kids. That's what they do now. I don't know that anybody I mean, I wish I could do an entire mailing to all the people who support Planned Parenthood who were like me, who are politically homeless now. They don't even know like what we're supposed to do here, because that is Planned Parenthood's entire model now. That's what they do. They do cross-sex hormones. Yeah, and so I want to do the closing. So thank you all for coming here. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I do have some brochures and things that we're doing with Partners for Ethical Care. And one of the things that I wanted to invite you all personally to is we're doing an event on April 20th called It's Bigger Than Texas, Exposing the Gender Industry in America. We have a panel of 7. Alex Aaron, who is our president of the board of Partners for Ethical Care. She's a gender mapper. She maps all the gender clinics in the world. She's in Israel, so she'll be coming over from Israel. Miriam Grossman will be there, Brandon Showalter of the Christian Post, and a number of other panelists. So we will be stepping people all the way through how do you convince somebody that somebody might not be the biological sex that you can very clearly see that they are, all the way through how do you get this into schools, how do you get good people to do bad things, and then how do you put it into law. So we'll walk people through that. It's a panel discussion, and then we have a full hour-long Q&A. And you've managed to stay awake here, so I think you can do it in Texas. And then the following morning at the Capitol steps, we have what I call the Rally for Reality. I had to come up with a name when I was tweeting, and I just made it up, but people like it. So we'll have a rally on the Capitol steps, and then the following that same evening on the 21st, we're going to screen, not us, but 2 volunteers are screening 2 documentaries, Affirmation Generation, and then the Detransition Diaries by Jennifer Lal. So we're doing a whole awareness thing, and I'm going to tell you, Wisconsin and Chicago are not that far away, so April is a good time to go to Texas. To be honest with you, I know the weather around here. You should really go to Austin during that time. It's affordable, so ticket, we have I created a sliding scale ticket, so it's 45 to 100, it's whatever. And then we have $10 student tickets in case some of you are students like me, and you can pay $10. Yeah, so thank you all for coming, and as you come up, I'll just put all the brochures and things that I have out, because that's what we use the donations for. We're just grifters who take it to print stuff and then distribute material. We call that awareness. Other people call it all kinds of things. Like we actually use donated money to fly Chloe to Louisiana and Ohio and all of that. And it's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking it made it sound like we coerced you. We just kept bullying you on the internet until you're like, come on, testify, do this. And I would say, it's funny, I feel I have to say this publicly, we actually did the opposite of that. I think I don't know how many times I actually said it to you, but Donna and I would kind of surround you and be like, you can say no, you can stop right now, you don't have to do this. You know, even though we flew you out here, you can go home right now. You don't have to do this right now. You can stop in the middle of your testimony. You can walk out, you can go home. Like, but any of that stuff, because Chloe was 17 years old.
It's a good thing I didn't, though.
Yeah, it is a good thing. It is a good thing. So we're very thankful, and we keep kind of a close eye on Chloe and all the other children who have been harmed. So thank you.
Yeah, again, I just want to say thank you guys for being here, because you guys are the ones that are going to make the difference. Us up here, we're just resources, and we are giving you the resources and the tools to go and fight. And so by being here, it shows that you are already one step closer than a lot of other people to understanding. Understand that a lot of people, they just don't know, and so seek to inform them. You're not going to make change by beating people over the heads. You can't execute change that way, so you have to make them realize what's actually happening and what's happening in the schools, what's happening in the culture, what's happening in the doctor's offices, and all of those places. And if you guys want to go see any more of my stuff, I do have my website. It's sarahhigdon.com. There's a links page, and it has links to all my social media, my YouTube channel, all my articles that I've written in Human Events and Post-Millennial. And I've written on these topics. I wrote on SEL as well and how it's a social credit system. And so there's some stuff on there, as well as I would be remiss to not mention to go onto the Gays Against Groomers website, because there is a resource page on there as well, and it has links to all these different organizations like GenSpec and other organizations like that are doing the work as well. So we're trying to build this coalition to fight against the gender ideology that's happening. So again, thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for coming. If you guys want to come up to me after this and ask me more questions about my experience or just a subject, or I don't know, something like my favorite food, I guess, you can. But I forgot to mention that I also have a lawsuit coming up. I've teamed up with Harmeet Dillon and people at Center for American Liberty to hold my healthcare provider and my doctors accountable for what happened. And you guys can learn about the lawsuit and contribute to the cause at the Center for American Liberty website. And if you're wondering for where else to find me, I'm on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, all under the same username, CHOOCOLE, Chukul.
Once again?
CHOOOCOLE. It's kind of weird. It's just my nickname. Thank you guys so much.
Sheila, you want to go ahead?
Sure, I just want to thank everyone for coming and for opening their minds to this discussion and to hearing what we have to say, particularly the candidates and the members, the people who are in elected office, that in particular to take your jobs very seriously and to look at the truth and look at the things that we're saying. Because literally children's lives depend on the decisions you make. And we all have to, as parents, as healthcare providers, as, leaders in our communities, we have to do everything in our power to protect the vulnerable. And our children are vulnerable, and they are the prey, and we need to protect them. And because it's coming at them from all angles. It's the phone they carry in their hand all day. It's the computer that they're in front of at school and at home, and it's in their community. And so we have to teach them to put them on guard and support them so that they can make true informed decisions and they can guard against the propaganda that is hitting them from every angle. So thank you.
Well, I'll be brief here. Thank you, Allie. Thank you for everyone who organized this event and to the other panelists. As a mom and as a K-12 attorney, it's a very important topic. So I would just encourage you all to stay engaged, stay vigilant. Will, I'm very grateful to be able to work at an organization where we can enact positive policy change, create resources for you all, and when necessary, use litigation to create positive change as well. So thank you for being here. Thank you all for your support, and always feel free to reach out to us at Will.
I just have a couple things. First off, somebody left a coat in the other room. It is on the podium there. It was Barb. I wanted to say a special thank you. We had the MacGyver Institute offered to record this for us tonight, so it will be available, and everybody that gave an email, I'll make sure you get the link. Thank you again to Vicki. She helped us get all of you here, and I didn't ask her. She just said, I have to help these people because this is going on. But most importantly, I'd like to thank the Ingleside for not canceling us.
Yeah.
Their extra security, the volunteer security that we have, and the armed security that we had walking the perimeters, making sure that we were safe, and not letting the protesters take over this, as you can see, very peaceful event. I share a stage with a self-proclaimed radical feminist. I am a self-proclaimed uber conservative, and we have common ground. So this was truly a nonpartisan. It's just mothers, parents, fathers wanting the best for our children. So thank everybody for being here. It's not the best weather, and some of you had long drives. I appreciate it.